There. Good morning again. Thank you again, Ronak, for organizing this panel. I have entitled my presentation as Filipinos Are Resilient, Situating Community-Based Responses to Hazards. My objective is to locate the resilience narratives of vulnerable communities to the recent hazards that have displaced and further marginalized them as urban dwellers. I would like to argue that current responses of the Philippine government, as documented by media organizations, have capitalized on this very celebrated notion of Filipino resilience to fill the structural gaps that have made the sector of the population vulnerable in the first place. Next slide, please. In the recent months, as you may have heard from the news, the Philippines have experienced its typhoon season vis-a-vis the growing threat of the COVID-19 pandemic. When Typhoon Vamco, locally named Ulysses, ravaged the country, the government's immediate response was to congratulate Filipinos for our preparation and resilience. Although several local government units have sufficiently prepared their residents, some admitted to lack of foresight on the extent of flooding that the typhoon could bring. Next slide, please. One of the hashtags that became so popular in Twitter during the onslaught of the recent typhoons was Nasaan ang Pangulo, translated as Where is the President? There was a noticeable gap in pre-landfall directions, which the public equated to inefficient state response. Narratives on resilience have yet again been called on by the government as a responsibility that Filipinos ought to display during periods of hazards. Next slide, please. In a state-run telecast the day after, the President Duterte shifted the blame on widespread flooding in several locations to informal settlers, whom he said were responsible for deforestation as they cut trees to build their makeshift houses. This, of course, is not supported by data. Studies have shown that the key drivers of deforestation in the country include agricultural expansion and infrastructure expansion. Blaming a sector whose actions have minimal contribution to the overall state of deforestation shifts accountability from commercial and state-supported industries to the citizens who have been long excluded in development planning. Next slide, please. I have been working with a subaltern community in Manila where flooding is a reality that children grow up into. During the two recent weather disturbances, their community was submerged in flood water and garbage. Majority did not evacuate. I kept on texting my community partners there almost every single hour. Have you evacuated? Are you evacuating? How is the evacuation process? And to all of my questions, it felt I felt kind of being in the wrong situation because I'm the one that they're trying to comfort. They're the ones telling me, don't worry, we're okay. But I know for a fact that they are not because I've been there during a typhoon before and I know that it floods a lot. So what majority did not evacuate, as I've said, despite the threats of storm surges due to two major reasons. One is fear of looting. They fear that if they leave their houses and evacuate, others may take their possessions, their very limited possessions. Another fear that they have is that of catching the virus, the coronavirus, in a locality where the number of residents far outweighs the capacity of the evacuation center, which at this time is also serving as a quarantine facility. It was no surprise that majority of my community partners have decided to remain in their homes. One of them, the president of the organization, community organization that I was working with, told me that they would rather brave the floods than subject themselves to being threatened by COVID because there was not a good enough isolation process in the quarantine facility. So when you ask them if they know about climate change related concepts like storm surge, rising sea levels, or increasing frequency of weather disturbances, they would display sufficient localized knowledge. However, the capacity to respond sustainably to the threats of climate change remain low due to neoliberal policies that govern their very existence in the city. The location of this community is just behind Manila's biggest golf course, and they've been living there since the 1970s, and up until now there is no discussion of giving them the land where they built their houses. The government has decided to give them evacuation center with a population of 70,000 people. The evacuation center is only good for 3,000 people. So the rest of the population will have to fend for themselves during periods of flooding. These photos that you're seeing were taken by my collaborator, Mary Chris, at the height of Typhoon Vamco. On the lower left, you can see that everything was submerged in flood water. That is about almost thigh deep. That includes the vegetable garden that their group developed to address the growing food insecurity in the community that was heightened because of the quarantine that we have been subjected to for the past 9 months. On the right, you can see the pile of garbage that was washed ashore. This garbage are not only from the residents, as these are also from other areas of the city, because this community is situated in an estuary. It acts like a catch basin for two of the biggest bodies of water in Manila. The same situation was met by other informal communities that I'm working with, which are situated in low-lying and hazard-prone areas. Next slide, please. For 2 days, so again, this is another picture during the typhoon. For 2 days, community members continuously took turns digging makeshift drainage to reduce the volume of flood waters entering their homes. Both men and women have taken turns digging more like a makeshift drainage to make sure that the water just keeps on going back to the estuary. They know the drill. A storm will come, their homes will be flooded, garbage will be washed ashore, food will be inaccessible for days, and they know that they are on their own. They have known this drill for the past decades. Children have grown up to this drill. Children help in making this makeshift drainage as well. Next slide, please. They already know that given their informal or undocumented residency in this urban space, that they will always be held accountable for insisting to be part of the city, as though their right to live here is limited to a select few. Every time that they would try to ask for better conditions, living conditions, the answer that they would receive is, all right, if you want better living conditions, then we will have to relocate you outside of the city, which again is a very contested move of the government. Another option that they're being given is for them to go back to their own provinces. So again, it's a matter of who has the right to live in the city. So as such, they would often readily develop and implement responses to periods of disaster, be it in terms of a feeding program or a relief operation. The pictures you're seeing are some of the community-based responses that have been going on for the past 9 months, since food, water, and other basic services are not getting into the community, and since this is what is considered a congregate setting, an informal settlement, the government has decided to lock them down because it is believed that they're it's believed that they may cause a lot of COVID threat to the greater population. So there's high food insecurity, there's health insecurity, NGOs cannot come in as well, and even other civilian actors. So most of the people working there during the two disasters that has happened in this community are military actors. So again, I'm not gonna go into that part, but there's much fear, much unrest going on in the area. So these pictures that you're seeing are the initiatives of the women to combat food insecurity. And these acts are often romanticized within the frame of resilience, circumventing the state-sponsored marginalization of these city dwellers. Next slide, please. When Filipinos are displaced by flooding, the immediate response of the state is to ascribe blame to individuals and communities, such that their suffering is self-afflicted. Why did you decide to come to Manila, live here? It's your fault that you're suffering. That's the common theme of argument. If they choose to live in a hazard-prone area, then they have to find ways to be resilient during periods of flooding. This kind of argument excludes the key players who are responsible for such hazards to even threaten a population. The term pasaway, a Filipino term, pasaway, which loosely translates to being hard-headed, is a go-to adjective that reifies the blame on the individual instead of examining the structural gaps leading to intergenerational vulnerability of sectors of the population. This term was used yet again at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic in the country to refer to Filipinos who contracted the disease. Those who got sick were to blame for getting sick. Never mind that there was no sufficient safe transportation available for workers. Unless policy and implementation gaps are recognized by state actors, hazard preparation and responses would remain as an individual's responsibility while institutions remain unaccountable. Thank you.